Hello, today we're looking at watercolour techniques using a rigger brush. I've had some questions and comments recently about the use of this brush, so I hope this video will be useful. A rigger has much longer hair than the other brushes that we're using, and it gets its name because it was used to paint the rigging on maritime paintings. Whatever brand you buy, you'll find they come in different sizes, and the sizes I use mainly are number 1s, 2s and 3s. Shortly in the video I'll be demonstrating how to use them. But first, here are a few examples of how I've used the rigger for spring and summer paintings of branches, twigs and grasses. And later on in the video I'll show you some recent work I've been doing on winter paintings when I've been using the rigger to paint winter trees. Okay, so I've got my number 3 rigger here, and I'm going to mix up a brown, and I'm going to use this rigger to do some branches on some trees. A good tip for you: don't mix up your colour with the rigger. Clearly you're not going to be able to mix up much paint, and also you are going to ruin the point on the brush. This also applies as well to if you're going to use some nice little watercolour brushes with lovely points. I wouldn't mix the colour with them. What I would suggest is that you get an older brush to do your mixing. Especially I've got some nice soft colour here, so it's not much of a problem. But if your colour's hard and you're scratching around like this, you're going to ruin the points. You're going to wear out the brushes before the time. So I would suggest that you do your mixers with an old brush and then use your better brushes and your riggers to do your painting. It seems pretty obvious, I suppose, but I forget myself. I keep having to remind myself not to do that. Use your old brush to do your mixing, so it is a really good tip for you. So here we're getting a bit of a mix of, I just want a nice brown to do a few tree trunks and things to show you how to use the rigger. So it's just ultramarine with some burnt sienna. Just getting something like this. It doesn't really matter. So here's my number 3 rigger. Again, I'm going back into these, but they're very soft. It's not doing it any harm. It doesn't, no matter how many colours you mix up beforehand, you always have to go back in. The rigger is really useful, not only because it can give you nice thin lines, but also because it holds so much paint. As you can see here, when you're loading up the rigger, don't just dip the point of the rigger in, actually put the rigger in the paint and get it nice and loaded. Usually I use a rigger for painting trees and branches. If you work up from the bottom and gradually lift the pressure, then you can get these fine lines at the top. If you press on even more, now a number 3, this is the advantage of a number 3. You can do quite thick trunks nearer the base with the number 3 by pressing on. See the width of that line that you can get. As you lift, again, as you're just pressing on here, as you lift the pressure, then you can get these very fine marks here. You can do some adjustments here. Now you can see that it's holding so much paint that you don't need to go back and reload it all the time. You can paint much more loosely and freely than if you had a little brush that you had to all the time go back and dip into your paint. So this is one, and you can go back here, you can add some more colour, you can change the thickness a little bit in places that you want, just to vary the tones. So it's really a really nice brush to use. So this is using the number 3 brush. I could have got these strokes even thinner. Here's the number 2. I just want to point out that the consistency of paint is really important. If the paint is too thick, you're not going to be able to work like this. Maybe the trouble is, if you try to do something wrong when you're demonstrating, it doesn't usually happen. But look, let's try and make. I shouldn't be mixing with this brush, should I? But it is very soft, this paint. If you've got this really stiff mix here, am I going to be able to do it wrong? Yes. It can be quite useful, but you can see that it's hitting and missing, and you can see how quickly it's running out of paint as opposed to this one. It can be quite useful sometimes. Say you wanted some broken strokes for maybe some grasses or maybe some twigs and grasses in snow. A thicker mix will give you this more broken effect. But if you're looking for something more like this when you're painting a tree, you've got to get this consistency right. So let's go back to this number 2 brush, maybe just a touch more in here. And we'll do something like this. So we're going to press on. This paint's a bit thinner, isn't it? But you can see you're not getting that thickness of the branch here down the bottom, or the little trunk here. But it's going to keep going. And again, if you lift the pressure, you can get these strokes thinner and thinner. You can go really, really thin with the number 2. And it's still going to go, it's still keeping going. So it gives you this nice freedom when you're doing the strokes, rather than, which I do see in a lot of cases, you know, people painting trees like this, starting from the top and coming down and going like this, and you're getting these thick strokes on the top, and they're not using a rigger, they're just using a round brush, and it gets very contrived, very stilted painting like this. I know I'm exaggerating it for effect, but you can see what I mean. You're much better using, especially if you want to paint loosely, you're much better doing these nice free strokes with the rigger. You can tell I'm a fan, can't you? Okay, let's do a mix again, using the proper brush this time. We'll mix up another pool of colour here. It is difficult because you want your consistency to be thicker than milk. Very thin cream, possibly. It's difficult. It's all down to practice and experience. But what you're wanting to get is a nice fluid mix that will be fluid enough and watery enough to load the rigger, but still have some body to it, so that it will give you some of the dark tones that you're looking for. So like anything with painting, it is all down to practice, and the more you do, so use some, this is a case when you could possibly use practice paper. I don't like the term practice paper. I think you should always work on really good watercolour paper. I would recommend the Bockingford as a good all-purpose paper. But maybe if you've got some pads of watercolour paper and you don't like them, this is a good, use them to practice this sort of stroke on. So let's try this. This is the number 1. Again, we're not going to get this sort of thickness at the bottom, so it's no good if you're wanting this thickness. But you can see here, as I'm going, I'm going to have to load this up again, I think. It doesn't clearly hold as much. I don't use this very often for trees. Let me have another go. So it's fully loaded. So we're going with much finer lines on this one. It's quite a difference. As I say, I don't usually use this number 1. Let's try again. It's fully loaded. That's a bit better. You can see the difference. Now, you can see how useful this would be for the very, very fine little twigs on the ends of some trees, can't you? Look at this, it's just beautiful. So if you're the sort of person that loves to put lots and lots of twigs on the end, here like this, quite therapeutic. You could spend quite a long time with this little number 1, putting all these little twigs on the end. Because winter trees can look quite bare and dead if you don't do something with them. Putting the twigs on like this. Or what I do tend to do, if I want to suggest some foliage, is put a little bit of dry brush on the trees. You need a bit of a stiffer mix with this. I've got quite a few videos out describing dry brush work. I'll put some links below. But the dry brush work, the paint is much stiffer, and you use the side of the brush. You can get rid of it like this, and then using the side of the brush, you can just draw down like this on the twigs, on the end of the twigs, to give you this impression. They're not leaves, they're just the impression of the little twigs, the smaller twigs on the end of here, as opposed to doing lots and lots of strokes. It depends on what you like to do, on your style and how you like to paint, but you've got lots of options there. So I hope you found that useful for the rigger, for doing the trees and the little twigs. I'm trying to think what else I would use the rigger for now. I do use it sometimes, I must say, for doing little details, maybe like little fence posts that might be at the base of a tree. You know, I always like to put a little fence in things. That could be quite useful. Yeah, they're quite useful fence posts, and especially with possibly snow scenes when you're using the white gouache, you could use the rigger to do that because it will hold more of the paint than the tiny little brushes. I probably wouldn't use it for a lot of detail work. If you've got something like, I'll do this a little bit bigger, a window, you could use it. You could certainly use it for filling in the panes of glass. That would be quite often they're dark, like this. It would depend on the size. I think, yeah, I would use it maybe for something like this. As long as you're painting quite loosely and you're not being too detailed, it will work quite nicely for that. As opposed to using a very small brush, if I can find one. Here we are. So let's do another window here. These are the things that are coming to mind for what I would possibly use the rigger for. This is a little brush here. You see, it's not going to hold the amount of paint, but I might use this little brush is fine for doing windows, but you could use the rigger as well. So, you know, it's these little details, little fences, little panes. I also use it for doing grasses, so I'll do a quick demonstration on that. So I've mixed up a couple of greens here, and I'm using Prussian blue with burnt sienna and a little bit of yellow. I'm using a number 2 brush, number 2 rigger, loading it up. I'm going to have a look at doing some grasses and foliage. Now, if you've got lots of grasses in the foreground, and you want to put a lot of grasses in, whatever size, you can see that it works really nicely. You can keep on going. You can vary the tone, you can vary the strength. So let's load it up again. I must say I'm finding doing this, there's quite a difference on the amount of paint these brushes are holding. The number 2 is holding nowhere near as much as the number 3 brush. Let's just have a look at those. The number 3 is the one that I tend to use the most. Just sort of touch more water to that, just so I can load it up. Let's have a look at this. There's a big difference here between the number 2 and the number 3 in this series. There we go. It's working better for me. I like it. I like the number 3. So over the years, it's the one I've sort of chosen to use. Now, you can see that it's not taking that long. It's taking shorter time than it would with a little brush, but it's still taking quite a lot of time. I've put out a video a few weeks ago, no, months ago now it must be, on painting grasses using dry brush, and I've incorporated some strokes with riggers as well. I'll put the link below. So I do hope this has helped you, and for those people that tend to shun riggers and don't use them at all, I know a few people like that, perhaps this will encourage you to get them out and have a practice. I hope so. I'm ending the video with a slideshow of some of my paintings, where you should be able to see the strokes I did with the rigger. If you want to see more of my videos, please subscribe to my channel, and also check out the description box for more information, which will include links to art materials and some additional teaching resources. So bye for now, and I hope you'll join me again.